Hi, I'm Marcus. The day my brother-in-law handed me a plastic plate at his dinner table while everyone else ate off fine china, I knew exactly where I stood in his world. What he didn't know was that in 6 months, I'd be signing his paychecks. The look on his face when he walked into that boardroom and saw me sitting at the head of the table, that's a memory I'll carry forever. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about something much deeper than that. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The humiliations started small, like most cruelties do. It was Thanksgiving 2019, and my sister Sarah had invited me to her new house in Westfield. She'd married Derek 6 months earlier, this finance guy who wore expensive suits and drove a BMW that cost more than most people make in 2 years. I was genuinely happy for her. Sarah deserved someone who could give her the life she wanted, the stability our childhood never provided. I pulled up to their house in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the one with the dent in the passenger door and the air freshener that had long stopped working. Their driveway was pristine, lined with decorative stones that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Derek's BMW sat next to Sarah's new Lexus, both gleaming under the afternoon sun like trophies. The house was everything Sarah had dreamed of growing up. 2 stories, brick facade, perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I stood at the front door for a moment, adjusting my shirt. It was clean, pressed even, but it was from Target. I'd bought it 3 years ago, and it was starting to show its age around the collar. Sarah answered the door with a huge smile, her face lighting up the way it used to when we were kids and I'd come home from my part-time job with candy for both of us. She hugged me tight, and for a moment, everything felt normal, like we were just brother and sister, not separated by the growing gap between her new life and my old struggles. "Marcus, I'm so glad you made it," she said, pulling me inside. The entryway was spacious, with marble floors and a chandelier that cast warm light across cream-colored walls. Everything smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey, like a home where money wasn't a constant worry. Derek appeared from what I assumed was the living room, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my rent. He extended his hand with that practiced smile, businessman perfect, the kind that reaches the mouth but never quite touches the eyes. "Marcus, good to see you," he said, his grip firm but brief. "Sarah's told me so much about you." I wondered what exactly she'd told him. That I worked 2 jobs to keep my studio apartment? That I'd been laid off from my engineering position 8 months ago and was still climbing out of the hole it left? That I drove 40 minutes each way to save money on groceries? The dining room was set for 8 people. Sarah's new friends from the neighborhood, Derek's parents who'd driven up from Connecticut, and us. The table was beautiful, set with what looked like real china, delicate plates with gold trim that caught the light from the chandelier above. Crystal glasses stood at attention next to polished silverware that reflected the warm glow of candles placed strategically around a room. "Everyone, this is my brother Marcus," Sarah announced as we entered. The conversations paused politely as faces turned toward me. Derek's parents, Robert and Patricia, looked exactly like I'd imagined. Well-dressed, confident, the kind of people who'd never wondered if they could afford to fill up their gas tank. "Marcus works in engineering," Sarah added, and I appreciated that she said it in present tense, even though we both knew the reality was more complicated. As people began to take their seats, I noticed Derek moving around the table, making final adjustments to place settings. When he got to where I was standing, he paused, glanced at the china plate that was there, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know what?" he said, his voice casual but carrying something underneath. "Let me grab you something more appropriate." He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a plastic plate. Not just any plastic plate, but the kind you'd use for a child's birthday party. It was blue with cartoon characters on it, the kind of thing you'd buy at a dollar store. He set it down at my place setting with the same casual confidence he'd used to arrange everything else. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people focusing on their meals, but the thick, uncomfortable silence that follows when everyone notices something they wish they hadn't. Sarah's cheeks flushed red, but she didn't say anything. Derek's parents exchanged a glance. The neighbors suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. "There we go," Derek said, settling into his own chair. "Don't want any accidents with the good china." I stared at that plastic plate for a long moment. The cartoon characters seemed to mock me, their bright colors garish against the elegant table setting. Everyone else had delicate porcelain that probably cost more per piece than I spent on food in a week. I had a child's plate that would have embarrassed a 10-year-old. The message was clear. I wasn't just different from everyone else at that table, I was less than. I was the kind of person who couldn't be trusted with nice things, who didn't deserve the same treatment as the adults in the room. I was Sarah's embarrassing brother, the one who needed to be managed and contained. I could have said something, could have asked why I was the only one eating off plastic while even Derek's elderly father got the good china. Could have pointed out the absurdity of treating a grown man like he was likely to break something. But I didn't. I sat down, put my napkin in my lap, and pretended it didn't matter. The dinner proceeded normally for everyone else. Conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes, about private schools and country club memberships. I contributed when spoken to directly, but mostly I just ate in silence, the plastic plate a constant reminder of my place in Derek's world. When Sarah served the turkey, the slice she gave me looked smaller than everyone else's. When Derek poured wine, my glass got less than half of what the others received. When his mother complimented the stuffing, Derek made sure to mention that it was made with expensive organic ingredients from a specialty market. Every interaction felt calculated to remind me that I was operating in a different economic universe than everyone else at that table. These weren't accidental slights or unfortunate oversights. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. They were deliberate choices, each one designed to put me in my place. After dinner, as people moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, Derek pulled me aside. His demeanor was friendly, almost conspiratorial, like we were sharing a private joke. "Hope you don't mind about the plate," he said, his voice low enough that Sarah couldn't hear from where she was arranging dessert plates in the kitchen. "It's just that these dishes are family heirlooms. Patricia would have a heart attack if anything happened to them." He gestured toward his mother, who was holding her coffee cup with the casual confidence of someone who'd never broken anything valuable in her life. The implication was clear. I was the type of person who breaks things. I was careless, unreliable, not to be trusted with anything of value. "I understand," I said, though understanding and accepting were two very different things. "I knew you would," Derek replied, clapping me on the shoulder like we'd reached some kind of understanding. "Sarah's lucky to have such an easygoing brother." Easygoing. That's what you call someone when they don't fight back, when they accept humiliation with a smile. I wasn't easygoing. I was calculating. Every slight, every small cruelty, every moment of casual dismissal was being filed away in a part of my mind that was keeping score. The drive home that night was long and quiet. I kept thinking about that plastic plate, about the way Derek had looked at me when he set it down. Like I was something to be managed rather than welcomed. Like I was a problem Sarah brought with her that he was graciously willing to tolerate. But what bothered me most wasn't Derek's casual cruelty. It was my own silence. I'd sat there and taken it, played the role of the grateful poor relation who knows his place. I'd smiled and nodded and pretended that being treated like a child was somehow acceptable because Derek was paying for dinner. That night, lying in my studio apartment on a mattress that sat directly on the floor, I made a decision. This wasn't going to be my story forever. The plastic plate wasn't going to define me. Derek's condescension wasn't going to be the final word on my worth. I'd been treading water since losing my job, taking whatever work I could find to keep the lights on. A shift at a call center here, some freelance technical writing there, anything to avoid asking Sarah for help. I knew she would have given it, but I also knew it would come with conversations with Derek about my situation, and I wasn't ready for that kind of charity. But treading water isn't swimming towards shore. It's just staying afloat until you get too tired to continue. That Thanksgiving dinner showed me I needed to stop just surviving and start building something that Derek's money couldn't diminish. The next morning, I started applying for jobs with a focus I hadn't had before. Not just any engineering position, but specifically roles at companies where I could grow, where my skills could translate into the kind of success that spoke in Derek's language. Money, position, the kind of power that makes people respect you, whether they like you or not. I also started paying attention to Derek's world in ways I hadn't before. Sarah would mention things in passing during our weekly phone calls. Derek's company, Meridian Financial, was a mid-sized investment firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. They bought struggling companies, streamlined operations, and either sold them for profit or integrated them into larger portfolios. It was the kind of business that required technical expertise alongside financial acumen. Companies didn't just need money to turn around, they needed operational efficiency, process improvements, technological upgrades. They needed people who understood both the human and mechanical aspects of making things work better. I started researching everything I could about corporate restructuring, about the intersection between engineering and finance. I read books, took online courses, attended webinars. Every free moment became an investment in becoming the kind of person Derek would have to take seriously. The rejection letters came regularly at first. Companies wanted experience I didn't have, certifications I couldn't afford, references from positions I'd never held. But each rejection taught me something about what they were actually looking for, about the gaps between what I offered and what they needed. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, I got a call from TechSolve Consulting. They were a smaller firm that specialized in helping companies integrate technology solutions during corporate transitions. The pay was decent, the work was challenging, and most importantly, it was exactly the kind of experience that would translate into bigger opportunities. My supervisor, Janet Wong, was the kind of person who evaluated you based on results rather than pedigree. She didn't care that my resume had gaps or that my clothes came from discount stores. She cared that I could look at a struggling company's operations and figure out how to make them more efficient. The work was demanding in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about technical solutions. It was about understanding how businesses functioned at the most fundamental level, how departments communicate, how information flowed, how decisions got made and implemented. I was learning to see companies as complex systems that could be optimized, improved, made more profitable. Within 3 months, I was leading my own projects. Small ones at first, helping family-owned businesses implement better inventory management systems or streamlining their customer service processes. But each success built on the last, and Janet began trusting me with bigger clients, more complex challenges. The money was good enough that I could move out of the studio apartment and into a one-bedroom place with actual furniture. I bought clothes that fit properly, got a car that didn't require constant prayer to start, began eating meals that didn't come from the clearance section of the grocery store. But more than the material improvements, I was developing something I'd never had before: professional confidence. I was good at this, really good. I could walk into a struggling company, spend a week analyzing their operations, and present solutions that would save them significant money while improving their output. Sarah noticed the changes when I visited for her birthday that spring. I arrived in my newer car, wearing clothes that actually fit, carrying myself differently than I had 6 months earlier. She hugged me with the same warmth as always, but I could see the questions in her eyes. Derek noticed too, though he tried to hide it behind the same condescending friendliness he'd always shown me. When I mentioned my new job, he asked about it with the tone people use when they're expecting to hear something they can politely dismiss. "Consulting," he said, nodding like he understood exactly what that meant. "That's good experience. Great way to learn about different industries." He said it like consulting was something you did while you figured out what you really wanted to be when you grew up. Like it was a stepping stone to something more serious, rather than a legitimate career in its own right. But when I mentioned some of the companies I'd worked with, his expression shifted slightly. He recognized the names, knew their reputations, understood that the work I was describing wasn't entry-level busy work. "Interesting," he said, his tone more neutral than dismissive. That's actually valuable experience. It was the first time Derek had ever acknowledged that I did anything worth taking seriously. Not quite respect, but recognition. A small crack in the wall of condescension he'd built around me. Over the next several months, that crack widened. TechSolve's reputation grew as word spread about the results we were delivering for clients. Companies that had been hemorrhaging money were becoming profitable. Operations that had been chaotic were running smoothly. The kind of transformations that got noticed by larger firms looking to expand their capabilities. Janet started receiving calls from bigger consulting companies, headhunters looking to poach talent, clients asking if TechSolve could handle larger, more complex projects. We were becoming known as the firm that could take on seemingly impossible challenges and deliver results that exceeded expectations. My role evolved along with the company's reputation. I wasn't just implementing solutions anymore, I was designing comprehensive restructuring strategies. I was the person clients called when they needed someone who could see the big picture while managing every technical detail. The money followed the reputation. My salary doubled, then tripled. I moved again, this time into a place with hardwood floors and windows that actually let in natural light. I bought furniture that wasn't assembled from boxes, clothes that didn't come with tags from discount stores. But the real change was internal. I was becoming the kind of person who walked into boardrooms and commanded attention, not because of who I knew or what I wore, but because of what I could deliver. Executives twice my age listened when I spoke because they knew I understood their businesses better than they did. That's when Hammond & Associates reached out. They were one of the most prestigious corporate restructuring firms on the East Coast, the kind of company that handled billion-dollar turnarounds for Fortune 500 companies. They'd been tracking my work at TechSolve for months, watching the results I was generating, the innovations I was bringing to traditional consulting approaches. The interview process was intense. 3 rounds of meetings, presentations to senior partners, detailed discussions about my approach to complex operational challenges. They weren't just evaluating my technical skills, they were assessing whether I could represent their firm to the kind of high-stakes clients who expected perfection. When they offered me the position of Senior Director of Operations Integration, the salary was more than I'd ever imagined earning. But the real attraction was the scope of the work. I would be leading teams that restructured entire corporations, making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. I accepted the offer on a Thursday afternoon in October, exactly 11 months after Derek had handed me that plastic plate. The irony wasn't lost on me. In less than a year, I'd gone from being treated like someone who couldn't be trusted with good china to being entrusted with the financial futures of major corporations. My first major assignment was a challenge that had defeated 2 previous consulting teams. Meridian Financial had acquired a struggling manufacturing company with operations in 6 states and was losing money faster than they could calculate. The previous consultants had recommended shutting down half the facilities and laying off 60% of the workforce. Derek's company wanted a second opinion before implementing such drastic measures. The contract was worth more than Hammond & Associates typically charged for 6-month engagements, with performance bonuses tied to actual improvements in profitability and efficiency. I spent 2 weeks reviewing everything the previous teams had produced, analyzing financial records, studying operational reports, interviewing key personnel. The more I dug into the situation, the more I realized that the problems weren't as fundamental as everyone assumed. They were structural, systemic issues that could be solved without devastating the workforce. When I presented my findings to Hammond's senior partners, they were skeptical. The manufacturing sector was notoriously difficult to turn around, especially when previous experts had recommended such extreme measures. But my track record spoke for itself, and they approved my approach. The real work began in November. I assembled a team of specialists and spent 3 weeks on site at each facility, mapping workflows, analyzing supply chains, identifying bottlenecks and redundancies. We interviewed everyone from floor supervisors to executive assistants, building a comprehensive picture of how the company actually functioned versus how the organizational charts suggested it should function. What we found was a company that had grown through acquisition without ever properly integrating its various components. Each facility was operating according to different protocols, using incompatible systems, duplicating efforts that should have been centralized. It was like an orchestra where each section was playing a different symphony. The solution wasn't layoffs or facility closures, it was integration. Standardizing processes, implementing compatible technology systems, creating clear communication channels between facilities. It would require significant upfront investment, but the long-term savings would be enormous. By January, we had a comprehensive restructuring plan that would not only return the company to profitability, but position it for sustainable growth. Instead of cutting the workforce by 60%, we would eliminate fewer than 10% of positions while retraining others for new roles in the integrated system. The presentation to Meridian's board was scheduled for the last Tuesday in January. I spent weeks preparing, knowing that this wasn't just about demonstrating our solution. This was about proving that Hammond & Associates could succeed where other firms had failed, that our approach to corporate restructuring was fundamentally superior to traditional slash-and-burn methods. What I didn't know until the morning of the presentation was who would be in that boardroom. Janet had mentioned that Meridian's team included several of their senior partners, but she hadn't provided names. I arrived early, set up my materials, tested the presentation equipment, and reviewed my notes one final time. At exactly 10 o'clock, the boardroom door opened and Meridian's team began filing in. I recognized most of them from research I'd done on the company's leadership structure. Senior partners, department heads, a few people I assumed were external advisors brought in for this specific project. Derek walked in third, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the same kind of expensive suit I remembered from Thanksgiving dinner. He was focused on some documents, not paying attention to the front of the room where I was standing. When he finally looked up and saw me, his face went through a series of expressions I'll remember for the rest of my life. Confusion first, like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Then recognition, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again without producing sound. The confident businesswoman who had handed me a plastic plate because I couldn't be trusted with real china was staring at me like I was a ghost who had materialized in his boardroom. "Good morning, Derek," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I'm looking forward to presenting Hammond & Associates restructuring recommendations for your manufacturing acquisition." The room was quiet for a moment as Derek processed the situation. His colleagues looked between us, sensing tension they didn't understand. Finally, Derek managed to find his voice.
"Marcus," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "I didn't realize you were with Hammond." "Senior Director of Operations Integration," I replied, letting the title hang in the air for a moment. "I've been leading the team analyzing your manufacturing operations. I think you'll find our recommendations quite different from what you've heard before." Derek took his seat at the conference table, his movements careful and deliberate. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to handle a situation where his wife's embarrassing brother was suddenly the expert everyone was looking to for solutions worth millions of dollars. The next 2 hours were among the most satisfying of my professional life. I presented our findings with the confidence that comes from knowing you're absolutely right. I walked them through our analysis, explained our reasoning, demonstrated why our approach would succeed where others had failed. Derek's colleagues asked thoughtful questions, challenged certain assumptions, pushed for clarification on implementation timelines. They treated me exactly like what I was, a senior consultant whose expertise they were paying premium rates to access. Derek remained quiet through most of the presentation, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just listening with an expression I couldn't quite read. When his colleagues expressed enthusiasm about our recommendations, when they began discussing implementation schedules and budget approvals, I could see him struggling to reconcile this version of me with the person he dismissed so casually 15 months earlier. After the presentation ended, and most of Meridian's team had left to discuss our proposal privately, Derek lingered in the boardroom. We were alone for the first time since that Thanksgiving dinner, and the silence stretched between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. "That was impressive," he finally said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Really impressive work." "Thank you," I replied, packing up my presentation materials with the same deliberate care he'd used when setting out those place settings. He stood there for another moment, clearly wanting to say something but not sure how to begin. Finally, he cleared his throat and spoke again. "Look, Marcus, I know things between us got off to a rough start. I hope we can move forward professionally." I looked at him directly, remembering the weight of that plastic plate in my hands, the casual cruelty of his assumption that I couldn't be trusted with nice things. But I also saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Uncertainty, maybe even the beginnings of respect. "Of course," I said. "I'm looking forward to working together on this project." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was something better than revenge. It was the knowledge that I had transformed myself so completely that Derek's opinion of me no longer mattered. I wasn't the same person who had sat silently at his dinner table, accepting humiliation because I didn't believe I deserved better. The plastic plate had been a message about my worth in Derek's world. But Derek's world was smaller than he'd imagined, and my worth was something I'd learned to define for myself. 3 weeks later, Meridian's board approved our restructuring proposal unanimously. The contract was worth more than Hammond & Associates had ever secured from a single client, and the performance bonuses were structured to reward actual results rather than theoretical projections. Derek had to sign off on every aspect of the implementation, which meant we would be working closely together for the next 8 months. The dynamic was surreal. Derek, who had once treated me like someone who needed special accommodations just to eat dinner at his table, now had to defer to my expertise on decisions that would affect his company's bottom line. Every recommendation I made, every process change I suggested, every timeline I established became part of official corporate policy, because Meridian was paying Hammond substantial fees for my judgment. Our first implementation meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at Meridian's corporate headquarters in downtown Hartford. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit, and spent the time reviewing my notes in the lobby. The building was impressive, in the way that financial firms always are. All marble and glass and subtle displays of wealth designed to inspire confidence in clients with serious money to invest. Derek appeared in the lobby at exactly 9 o'clock, accompanied by 2 other Meridian executives I recognized from the board presentation. He was dressed impeccably, as always, but there was something different in his posture. Less of the casual confidence I remembered, more of the careful attention you pay when you know you're being evaluated. "Marcus," he said, extending his hand with what appeared to be genuine professionalism. "Thanks for coming in early. We're eager to get started." The conference room on the 20th floor overlooked the Connecticut River, with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The table could seat 16 people comfortably, and every chair was occupied when we began the meeting. Meridian had assembled their full implementation team, department heads from each affected division, operations managers, IT directors, human resources personnel. I had requested this comprehensive gathering because successful restructuring requires buy-in from every level of the organization. You can design the most elegant operational improvements in the world, but they're worthless if the people responsible for implementation don't understand or support the changes. For the next 4 hours, I walked them through our detailed implementation plan. Phase 1 would focus on standardizing core processes across all 6 manufacturing facilities. Phase 2 would integrate their technology systems and establish centralized communication protocols. Phase 3 would optimize supply chain management and eliminate redundant administrative functions. Each phase was designed to build on the previous one, creating momentum and demonstrating measurable improvements that would maintain organizational support for the changes. We would track progress through specific metrics: production efficiency, error rates, communication response times, employee satisfaction scores. Derek asked thoughtful questions throughout the presentation, his tone respectful and engaged. When I explained why certain changes needed to happen in a particular sequence, he listened carefully and took detailed notes. When other team members raised concerns about implementation timelines, he deferred to my expertise rather than trying to insert his own opinions. It was a complete reversal of every interaction we'd ever had. Instead of being the person whose judgment couldn't be trusted, I was the expert whose recommendations shaped major corporate decisions. Instead of being dismissed or condescended to, I was the focal point of the meeting, the person everyone looked to for answers. The transformation wasn't lost on Derek's colleagues. During a coffee break, Patricia Hendricks, Meridian's VP of Operations, pulled me aside to discuss some technical details about the supply chain optimization. "Derek speaks very highly of your work," she said, stirring cream into her coffee. "He mentioned that you two have a family connection." "My sister is married to Derek," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "But this is strictly professional. Hammond doesn't take on projects where personal relationships might compromise our objectivity." She nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of integrity we expect from our consulting partners." Derek was smart to recommend Hammond for this project. I didn't correct her assumption about who had recommended whom. The truth was more complicated and, frankly, none of her business. But hearing that Derek was claiming credit for bringing in Hammond was interesting. It suggested he was adapting to the new reality faster than I had expected. Over the following weeks, Derek and I developed an efficient working relationship. He was responsive to my requests for information, supportive when I needed resources allocated to specific implementation tasks, and diplomatic when resistance emerged from other parts of the organization. He never once mentioned our personal history or acknowledged the awkwardness of our reversed positions. The work itself was demanding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Restructuring 6 manufacturing facilities while maintaining production schedules required precise coordination and constant problem-solving. Every day brought new challenges: equipment failures, supply chain disruptions, personnel conflicts, regulatory compliance issues. But these were the kinds of problems I had trained myself to solve. Each obstacle was a puzzle to be analyzed and addressed systematically. When a key piece of machinery broke down at the Pennsylvania facility, I worked with their maintenance team to design a temporary workaround that actually improved efficiency. When union representatives raised concerns about job security, I spent 3 days on site explaining how our changes would create more stable long-term employment. Derek began seeking my input on issues that went beyond the formal scope of our contract. When Meridian was considering acquiring another struggling company, he asked me to review their operational structure and assess the potential for improvement. When their board was debating whether to invest in new technology systems, he wanted my analysis of the cost-benefit implications. I was becoming his go-to expert on operational efficiency, the person he consulted when complex business decisions required technical insight. It was a level of professional respect I had never imagined earning from him, built on demonstrated competence rather than family obligation or social courtesy. The financial results began showing up in Meridian's quarterly reports by spring. Production efficiency had improved by 32% across all facilities. Error rates had dropped by more than half. Employee satisfaction scores had actually increased despite the organizational changes, largely because workers appreciated having clearer roles and better communication systems. Derek's standing within Meridian rose along with the performance metrics. The successful restructuring was viewed as evidence of his judgment in selecting consulting partners and his skill in managing complex implementation projects. Other divisions began requesting his involvement in their operational challenges, and there was talk of promoting him to senior partner ahead of schedule. During one of our regular progress meetings in May, Derek made a comment that revealed how much his perspective had shifted. "I have to admit," he said as we reviewed the latest efficiency reports, "when I first heard Hammond was assigning someone with your background to lead this project, I was skeptical. Engineering and finance don't always translate well to each other." "What changed your mind?" I asked, genuinely curious about his thought process. He paused, looking out the conference room window toward the river. "Results," he said finally. "You deliver what you promise, when you promise it. That's rarer than you might think in this business." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from Derek, though it was framed as professional assessment rather than personal acknowledgement. He was recognizing my competence without directly addressing his previous assumptions about my capabilities. The conversation reminded me of something Janet Wong had told me during my early days at TechSolve. Respect in business is earned through consistency, she had said. People can argue with your methods, disagree with your conclusions, even dislike your personality, but they can't argue with results that improve their bottom line. Derek was learning that lesson in real time. Whatever personal opinions he might have had about my background or social status, the numbers didn't lie. The restructuring was succeeding beyond anyone's expectations, and I was the person responsible for that success. By summer, our professional relationship had evolved into something approaching genuine collaboration. Derek would call me directly when urgent issues arose, confident that I could provide solutions that worked. When Meridian's board requested updates on the restructuring progress, Derek invited me to co-present the results rather than simply reporting what I had told him. The co-presentations were particularly satisfying because they demonstrated how completely our dynamic had changed. Derek, who had once treated me like someone who needed to be managed and contained, now introduced me to his board as the operational expert who has transformed our manufacturing capabilities. He deferred to my technical explanations, supported my recommendations, and shared credit for the project's success. Sarah noticed the change during a family barbecue that July. She had invited me to their house again, this time for a casual weekend gathering rather than a formal holiday dinner. When I arrived, Derek greeted me at the door with what appeared to be genuine warmth rather than the practiced politeness I remembered. "Marcus, perfect timing," he said, leading me toward the backyard where other guests were already gathered. "I was just telling the Hendersons about the manufacturing project. They own a distribution company that could probably benefit from some of your operational insights." The casual introduction to potential business contacts was a far cry from the isolation I had experienced at their Thanksgiving table. Derek wasn't just including me in the social conversation, he was presenting me as someone worth knowing professionally. When we sat down to eat, I noticed that the table was set with the same fine china I remembered from that difficult evening 18 months earlier. Derek placed my setting himself, using the same delicate plates he had once deemed too valuable to trust me with. He didn't make a show of it or draw attention to the gesture, but the symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. During dinner, the conversation naturally turned to business. The other guests were successful professionals in their own right, a real estate developer, an investment advisor, a corporate attorney. They asked informed questions about the restructuring project, wanted to understand the specific strategies that had generated such impressive results. Derek contributed to these discussions as an equal partner, rather than trying to claim sole credit. When someone asked about the technical aspects of the supply chain optimization, he gestured toward me and said, "Marcus can explain that better than I can. He designed the entire integration system." It was a level of professional acknowledgement that went beyond mere courtesy. Derek was treating me like a valued colleague whose expertise enhanced his own reputation rather than someone whose presence needed to be explained or justified. The evening progressed with the kind of easy conversation I had never experienced in Derek's circle before. People were genuinely interested in my perspectives on business efficiency, asked follow-up questions about my other projects, even requested my business card for potential future consulting opportunities. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Derek asked if I could stay for a few minutes to discuss some aspects of the restructuring project's final phase. Sarah went inside to start cleaning up, leaving Derek and I alone on the patio as the summer sun set behind the trees that lined their backyard. "The board is extremely pleased with the results," Derek said, settling back into his patio chair with a beer. "They're already talking about extending Hammond's contract for additional projects." "That's gratifying to hear," I replied. "The manufacturing restructuring should provide a solid foundation for future operational improvements." Derek nodded, then was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone was different, more personal than professional. "I owe you an apology," he said, looking directly at me for the first time. My behavior when we first met was inexcusable. I made assumptions about you that were wrong, and I treated you poorly because of those assumptions. I had wondered if this conversation would ever happen. Part of me had assumed Derek would simply allow our professional success to erase the past without directly acknowledging what had occurred between us. His willingness to address it explicitly suggested a level of self-reflection I hadn't expected from him. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied.
"I'm not making excuses," Derek continued, "but I think I was threatened by you in ways I didn't understand at the time. Sarah talks about you with such respect and affection, and I felt like I needed to establish some kind of dominance or control over the situation." It was a more honest assessment than I had anticipated. Derek was acknowledging not just that his behavior had been wrong, but that it had been motivated by insecurity rather than genuine judgment about my character or capabilities. "The plastic plate," I said quietly. "Yes," Derek replied, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine remorse. "That was deliberately cruel. I wanted to make you feel small, and I succeeded. I'm ashamed of that behavior." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of his admission settling between us. The apology didn't erase what had happened, but it did provide a context for understanding Derek's motivations that went beyond simple arrogance or classism. "You've built something impressive," Derek said eventually. "The reputation you have in the industry, the results you deliver, the way people respond to your expertise, you've earned every bit of it." "Thank you," I said. "That means something, coming from you." Derek smiled, and for the first time since I had known him, it reached his eyes. "Sarah was right about you from the beginning. I should have listened to her instead of letting my own insecurities get in the way." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how completely the relationship had transformed. Derek had gone from treating me like someone who couldn't be trusted with good china to recognizing me as a professional whose expertise enhanced his own career prospects. The journey from humiliation to respect had taken less than 2 years, but it felt like a lifetime of growth and change. The final phase of the restructuring project was completed in September, 3 weeks ahead of schedule and significantly under budget. The performance metrics exceeded every target we had established. Production efficiency was up 41%, error rates had dropped by 63%, employee satisfaction scores had improved across all 6 facilities. Meridian's board was so pleased with the results that they offered Hammond & Associates a retainer agreement to provide ongoing operational consulting for all their corporate acquisitions. It was the kind of long-term contract that consulting firms dream about, worth more than most companies generate in annual revenue. Derek was promoted to senior partner 2 months earlier than originally planned, largely based on his successful management of the restructuring project. His new role included responsibility for identifying and evaluating potential acquisition targets, work that would require ongoing collaboration with operational experts who could assess the improvement potential of struggling companies. During our final project meeting, Derek made an observation that captured how much both of us had changed during the process. "You know," he said as we packed up the last of our presentation materials, "18 months ago, I thought I had you figured out. I saw someone I assumed I was better than, and I treated you accordingly. But the truth is, I was the one who needed to grow." I looked at him, this man who had once handed me a plastic plate as a casual reminder of my place in his world. He had learned something about himself during our professional collaboration, something about the difference between inherited privilege and earned competence. "We both learned things," I replied. "That's what made the project successful." Derek extended his hand, and when I shook it, the gesture felt like a genuine conclusion to a chapter of both our lives. Not forgiveness exactly, but something more valuable. Mutual respect built on demonstrated competence and honest acknowledgement of past mistakes. The plastic plate had been Derek's way of telling me I didn't belong in his world, but I had built my own world, one where belonging was earned through competence rather than granted through social position. And in that world, Derek was the one who had needed to prove himself worthy of respect. The retainer agreement with Meridian opened doors I hadn't imagined existed.
Word travels fast in the corporate consulting world, especially when a firm delivers results that exceed expectations by such significant margins. Within 6 months of completing the manufacturing restructuring, Hammond and Associates was fielding inquiries from companies across 3 different industries, all wanting to know if we could replicate our success with their operational challenges. My reputation evolved from promising young consultant to recognized expert in corporate turnaround strategies. Industry publications began featuring articles about our innovative approach to organizational restructuring. Speaking engagements followed, then board advisory positions, then offers to lead entire consulting divisions at larger firms. But perhaps the most unexpected development was how my relationship with Derek continued to deepen beyond mere professional courtesy. What had started as mutual respect built on demonstrated competence grew into something approaching genuine friendship. We began having regular lunch meetings to discuss potential acquisition targets, strategic planning sessions that lasted well into the evening, even occasional social gatherings that had nothing to do with business. Derek was different in these contexts than I had ever seen him before. Away from the formal boardroom settings and corporate presentations, he revealed a thoughtful, analytical mind that I had previously dismissed as privileged entitlement. He asked probing questions about operational theory, wanted to understand the psychological aspects of organizational change, even requested recommendations for books that would help him better grasp the technical elements of business restructuring. The transformation was mutual. Working closely with Derek taught me things about corporate finance and investment strategy that complemented my operational expertise in ways I hadn't anticipated. He understood market dynamics, regulatory environments, and stakeholder management from angles that my engineering background hadn't prepared me to appreciate. Our collaboration became increasingly seamless. When Meridian was evaluating a potential acquisition in the aerospace sector, Derek handled the financial analysis, while I assessed the operational restructuring potential. When a struggling retail chain approached Hammond about turning around their distribution system, I led the technical evaluation while Derek provided strategic context about market positioning and competitive landscape. The success of these joint projects led to an unexpected conversation in March of the following year. Derek had invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant in downtown Hartford, the kind of place where business deals are discussed over courses that cost more than many people spend on groceries in a week. "I've been thinking about something," Derek said after we had ordered and the server had departed with our menus. "The work we've been doing together, the results we've been generating, it's bigger than either of our individual contributions." I nodded, curious about where he was heading with this observation. "Hammond has been great for your career development," Derek continued, "but you're constrained by their organizational structure, their existing client relationships, their conservative approach to risk-taking." "What are you suggesting?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where the conversation was going. Derek leaned forward, his expression serious but excited. "I'm suggesting we start our own firm, equal partners, leveraging both of our expertise, targeting the kind of high-stakes restructuring projects that most consulting companies won't touch." The proposition was bold, potentially lucrative, and completely unexpected. Derek was proposing that we become business partners, combining his financial acumen, corporate connections, with my operational expertise and restructuring capabilities. "That's a significant career change for both of us," I said carefully. "Are you sure Meridian would be comfortable with you leaving to start a competing firm?" Derek smiled. "I've already had preliminary discussions with the senior partners. They're interested in being our first major client, contracting with us exclusively for all their acquisition-related operational assessments. It would actually save them money compared to what they're currently paying Hammond." Over the next 2 hours, Derek outlined a comprehensive business plan he had been developing for months. He had identified a market niche for boutique consulting firms that specialized in high-complexity corporate restructuring. He had researched the regulatory requirements, analyzed potential startup costs, even identified office space in downtown Hartford that would project the right combination of professionalism and accessibility.
The financial projections were impressive. Based on the rates Hammond was charging for my services and the premium Derek commanded for his strategic consulting, we could potentially generate more revenue in our first year than most established consulting firms earned annually.
But beyond the financial incentives, there was something appealing about the autonomy Derek was describing. The freedom to select clients based on the complexity and interest of their challenges, rather than being assigned whatever projects generated the most billing hours. The opportunity to develop innovative approaches to organizational change without having to justify every decision to senior partners who prioritized conservative strategies over breakthrough results. "I need some time to think about this," I told Derek as we finished our dessert course. "Of course," he replied. "But don't take too long. The market opportunity we're looking at won't wait indefinitely for us to decide whether we want to pursue it." That evening, I found myself walking through my neighborhood, trying to process the implications of Derek's proposal. 2 years earlier, this man had treated me like someone who couldn't be trusted with decent dinnerware. Now he was suggesting we become equal partners in a venture that could define both of our careers for the next decade. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek's initial dismissal had motivated me to prove myself in ways that ultimately made me valuable enough to be his chosen business partner. His condescension had inadvertently created the circumstances that led to this opportunity for professional collaboration. But there was more to consider than just the symbolic satisfaction of the role reversal. Starting a consulting firm required substantial personal financial investment, carried significant professional risk, and would mean leaving the security of established organizations for the uncertainty of entrepreneurial ventures. I spent the weekend researching everything I could about boutique consulting firms, analyzing their success rates, studying the factors that differentiated thriving practices from failed startups. The data was mixed but encouraging. Firms that combined complementary expertise, maintained high service quality standards, and targeted underserved market niches had strong survival rates and growth potential. On Monday morning, I requested a meeting with Hammond's managing partners to discuss my career development options. I owed them transparency about the opportunity Derek had presented, even though it meant potentially losing their most profitable consultant to a competing firm. The conversation was more supportive than I had anticipated. Janet Wong, who had become something of a mentor during my time at Hammond, acknowledged that entrepreneurial ventures were a natural progression for consultants with my track record and market recognition. "We'd hate to lose you," she said during our meeting, "but we also recognize that this opportunity represents the kind of career advancement that Hammond can't provide through our existing organizational structure." The other partners agreed that starting my own firm was a logical next step, though they requested a 6-month transition period to transfer my ongoing client relationships and complete pending projects. They also offered to provide referrals and maintain collaborative relationships with whatever firm Derek and I established. The professional support from Hammond removed one of my major concerns about Derek's proposal. Instead of burning bridges with my current employer, I would be leaving with their blessing and maintaining access to their network and resources. That afternoon, I called Derek to schedule another meeting. "I'm interested," I told him, "but I want to see detailed financial projections, partnership agreements that clearly define roles and responsibilities, and a comprehensive analysis of our competitive positioning in the market." Derek's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "I've got all of that prepared. When can we meet?" 3 days later, we spent an entire afternoon in Derek's home office, reviewing documents he had prepared with the thoroughness I had come to expect from his corporate work. Partnership agreements drafted by experienced business attorneys, financial models that accounted for various growth scenarios, competitive analyses that identified our unique value proposition in the restructuring consulting market. The level of preparation was impressive, but what struck me most was how Derek had structured the partnership terms: equal ownership stakes, equal decision-making authority, equal compensation structures. There was no suggestion that his financial connections or corporate background entitled him to senior partner status. No assumption that my operational expertise was subordinate to his strategic planning capabilities. "This looks like genuine partnership," I observed as I reviewed the proposed organizational structure. "That's exactly what it is," Derek replied. "We each bring essential capabilities that the other lacks. Neither of us could succeed at this level without the other's expertise." The acknowledgement was significant, coming from someone who had once viewed me as fundamentally inferior in business acumen and professional competence. Derek was proposing a venture based on mutual respect and complementary strengths, rather than hierarchical relationships or dominant personalities. We spent the next 2 weeks refining the business plan, consulting with attorneys about partnership structures, and conducting preliminary market research to validate our assumptions about client demand. The more thoroughly we analyzed the opportunity, the more convinced I became that Derek had identified a genuine gap in the consulting market that we were uniquely positioned to fill. The firm we envisioned would target complex corporate restructuring projects that required both financial sophistication and operational expertise. Mid-sized companies that were too large for generalist business consultants but too small to attract attention from major strategy firms. Family-owned businesses that needed professional management systems without losing their entrepreneurial culture. Corporate acquisitions that required operational integration as well as financial restructuring. In April, we filed incorporation papers for Caldwell Strategic Solutions, named after Sarah's maiden name, as a nod to the family connection that had brought us together, albeit under difficult circumstances initially. Derek handled the legal and financial aspects of the startup process, while I began transitioning my client relationships at Hammond and developing our service delivery methodologies. The office space Derek had identified was perfect for our needs, professional enough to impress corporate clients, comfortable enough for extended strategy sessions, centrally located with easy access to major highways and airports. We signed a 5-year lease, invested in quality furniture and presentation equipment, and hired 2 junior consultants with complementary skills in financial analysis and project management. Our first major client was, predictably, Meridian Financial. They contracted with Caldwell Strategic Solutions to handle all operational assessments for their acquisition pipeline, a retainer agreement worth more in our first year than most consulting firms generate in their first 3 years of operation. But the real validation came from clients who had no previous relationship with either Derek or me. Word of mouth in the corporate consulting world led to inquiries from companies in industries we had never worked with before, healthcare systems needing operational optimization, technology firms requiring supply chain restructuring, manufacturing companies seeking efficiency improvements that would enhance their competitive positioning. Each successful engagement generated referrals to additional clients, creating a growth trajectory that exceeded our most optimistic projections. Within 8 months of launching Caldwell Strategic Solutions, we had a staff of 12 consultants, a client waiting list that stretched 6 months into the future, and revenue that put us among the fastest-growing consulting firms in the Northeast. The success was professionally gratifying, but it was the personal transformation that felt most significant. Derek and I had developed a working relationship built on mutual respect, shared challenge, and complementary expertise. We pushed each other to think more creatively, challenged each other's assumptions, and collaborated on solutions that neither of us could have developed independently. During one of our regular strategy sessions in September, Derek made an observation that captured how much our relationship had evolved. "You know," he said as we reviewed quarterly performance metrics, "2 years ago, I thought success meant being better than other people. Now I understand that real success means being better with other people." The comment reflected a maturity I had never seen in Derek during our early interactions. He had learned that sustainable professional achievement required collaboration, mutual respect, and genuine appreciation for others' capabilities, rather than competitive dominance or social positioning. "It's been an interesting journey," I replied, "for both of us." Derek nodded, then was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "I've never told you this," he said, "but Sarah was furious with me after that Thanksgiving dinner. She didn't speak to me for 3 days, and when she finally did, she made it very clear that my behavior was unacceptable. She said I had treated her brother like he was less than human," Derek continued, "and that if I ever did anything like that again, she would leave me. She meant it, too. I could see it in her eyes." The revelation added context to Derek's subsequent behavior that I hadn't understood at the time. His professional respect hadn't just been motivated by my demonstrated competence, it had been reinforced by consequences in his personal life.
"Sarah knows you better than anyone," Derek said. "She understood your potential long before I was smart enough to recognize it. She knew you would find a way to succeed, and she knew I was making a terrible mistake by underestimating you."
The acknowledgement meant something coming from Derek, but it also reminded me that Sarah had been the constant throughout this entire experience. She had never doubted my capabilities, never treated me as less than deserving of respect, never let her marriage change the fundamental relationship between us as siblings. That evening, I called Sarah to invite her and Derek to dinner at my apartment. Not the studio space I had occupied during the worst of my struggles, but the downtown Hartford loft I had purchased 6 months earlier, when Caldwell Strategic Solutions had become financially successful beyond my expectations. "I want to cook for both of you," I told her. "A proper dinner with proper plates and a proper celebration of how far we've all come." Sarah laughed, understanding the significance of my emphasis on proper dinnerware. "Derek will appreciate that more than you know," she said. "He still feels terrible about that Thanksgiving." The dinner party took place the following Saturday evening. I had spent the afternoon preparing a meal that reflected the same attention to detail I brought to my consulting work. Carefully selected ingredients, thoughtful preparation, presentation that demonstrated respect for my guests. When Derek and Sarah arrived, I served cocktails in quality glassware, arranged appetizers on elegant serving dishes, set the dining room table with china I had purchased specifically for the occasion. Not because I needed to prove anything about my social status or economic position, but because the evening represented a celebration of growth, change, and mutual respect. Derek noticed the attention to detail immediately, and I could see him processing the symbolism of the careful place settings, the quality dinnerware, the obvious investment I had made in creating a welcoming environment for my guests. "This is beautiful, Marcus," he said, examining the place setting at his chair. "Everything looks perfect." During dinner, our conversation ranged across topics that would have been impossible to discuss during that difficult Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. Business strategy, partnership challenges, long-term career goals, family planning, investment opportunities. Derek sought my opinions on subjects where my expertise exceeded his own, and I appreciated his insights into areas where his experience provided perspectives I lacked. Sarah watched these interactions with obvious satisfaction, clearly pleased to see her brother and husband treating each other as valued equals rather than tolerating each other out of family obligation. As the evening progressed, Derek became increasingly reflective about the journey that had brought us to this point. "I've learned something important about myself over the past 2 years," he said as we finished the main course. "I was so focused on maintaining my position, on being seen as successful, that I missed opportunities to actually become successful through collaboration with people like Marcus." He turned to me directly. "Your success isn't despite my initial treatment of you. Your success is despite my failure to recognize your potential when it should have been obvious." The distinction was important. Derek was acknowledging that my achievements represented personal growth and professional development that had nothing to do with his opinions or behavior. I hadn't succeeded to prove him wrong. I had succeeded because I had chosen to develop my capabilities regardless of external validation or recognition. "The plastic plate," Derek continued, his voice carrying genuine remorse, "that was about my insecurity, not your worth. I'm grateful you didn't let my limitations become your limitations." As the evening concluded and Derek and Sarah prepared to leave, Derek extended his hand for what had become our customary business handshake. But instead of the firm, brief contact of professional courtesy, he held the handshake longer and spoke with obvious sincerity. "Thank you," he said, "for your professionalism, for your partnership, for showing me what real success looks like." After they left, I stood in my dining room looking at the table we had shared. 3 place settings with matching china, crystal glasses that reflected the soft lighting, cloth napkins that had been used and would need to be laundered. Evidence of an evening spent in mutual respect, genuine conversation, and shared appreciation for how much all of our lives had improved through growth and change. The plastic plate Derek had given me that Thanksgiving had been a message about my worth in his world. But I had built my own world, one where worth was measured by contribution rather than consumption, by competence rather than connections, by character rather than circumstances.
The dinner party represented something more significant than symbolic revenge or personal vindication. It was a celebration of transformation, growth, and the possibility of moving beyond the limitations that others attempt to impose on us. 6 months later, Caldwell Strategic Solutions was featured on the cover of Regional Business Magazine as one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in New England. The article highlighted our innovative approach to corporate restructuring, our impressive client results, and our unique partnership model that combined financial and operational expertise. Derek and I were photographed in our office conference room, standing beside a whiteboard covered with strategic planning diagrams for a major client engagement. The image captured us as equal partners, professional collaborators, successful entrepreneurs who had built something significant through mutual respect and complementary capabilities. When the magazine arrived in my mailbox, I spent a few minutes studying that photograph. Two men in expensive suits, confident postures, surrounded by the evidence of professional achievement and business success. There was no indication in that image of the plastic plate that had once defined our relationship, no suggestion of the condescension and dismissal that had characterized our early interactions. But I remembered. I remembered the weight of that plastic plate in my hands, the casual cruelty of Derek's assumption that I couldn't be trusted with nice things, the humiliation of being treated as less than worthy of basic respect. I also remembered the decision I had made that night to transform myself so completely that Derek's opinion of me would become irrelevant. The long hours of work, the disciplined saving, the careful skill development, the gradual building of professional competence and personal confidence. The magazine photograph represented the completion of that transformation. I had become not just successful in Derek's terms, but successful in terms that transcended his narrow definitions of worth and achievement. I had built a life and career that commanded respect based on contribution rather than demanding respect based on status. The plastic plate had been Derek's way of telling me I didn't belong in his world. But I had built my own world, one where belonging was earned through excellence rather than granted through privilege. And in that world, Derek had needed to prove himself worthy of partnership rather than assuming his superiority based on social position or economic advantage. The story wasn't about revenge, though there was satisfaction in the role reversal. It wasn't about forgiveness, though I bore no lasting resentment toward Derek for his initial treatment of me. It was about transformation, about the possibility of growth and change that allows people to move beyond the limitations of their worst moments and their smallest perspectives. Derek had learned to see past his prejudices and recognize genuine competence wherever he encountered it. I had learned to define my worth through my own achievements rather than others' recognition of those achievements. Sarah had learned that the people she loved were capable of growth and change that exceeded her expectations for them. The plastic plate had been a symbol of dismissal and contempt. But the dinner party we shared in my apartment, the partnership we built through Caldwell Strategic Solutions, the mutual respect that grew from professional collaboration, these had become symbols of possibility, growth, and the redemptive power of choosing excellence over resentment. When I think about that Thanksgiving dinner now, I don't remember the humiliation or the anger. I remember the clarity it provided about who I wanted to become and the motivation it gave me to pursue that transformation regardless of the obstacles or opposition I encountered. The plastic plate taught me that other people's opinions of my worth were irrelevant compared to my own commitment to developing that worth through persistent effort and continuous improvement. Derek's condescension became the catalyst for achievements that exceeded both of our expectations and created opportunities that neither of us could have pursued independently. In the end, the plastic plate hadn't diminished me. It had revealed the strength I already possessed and motivated me to develop that strength into something that commanded respect from everyone who encountered it, including the man who had once deemed me unworthy of his good china. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.